What's triggered the transition from proprietary software to open source tools?
5 years ago, there was no package dedicated towards atom transformations.
Admiral played a big role also in getting a buy-in from a lot of pharmaceutical companies.
For me, being able to showcase that this can be done using this package, I think is a huge green light for us to engage with open source tools.
This is where we bridge the gap between innovation and scientific discovery. This is where technology meets science, a podcast by Epsilon. Each episode brings you insights from industry leaders who are pushing the boundaries of what's possible in life sciences. Enjoy, and if you like the series, click that subscribe button. This series is brought to you by Epsilon, a technology company that empowers pharmaceutical and life science companies to leverage open source technology for faster, data-driven decision-making in regulated environments. Welcome to Where Technology Meets Science, a podcast where we discuss how technology accelerates data analysis in life science and pharmaceutical companies. Today we have a guest from GSK, Ben Straub, who's a principal programmer responsible for initiatives within our adoption in the immunology therapy area. He's also been a very active contributor to open source, helping to develop and maintain packages that help in clinical reporting in pharmaverse. Welcome, Ben. It's good to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
How are you today?
I am doing very well.
Great.
Just want to say that this is a disclaimer that this commentary is my own, does not necessarily reflect that of GSK itself.
I don't want to start with GSK journey to open source. In one of the previous episodes, I spoke with Paweł Przytuła, who was mentioning GSK as one of the leading examples of embracing open source and clinical trials, clinical reporting. And could you tell me, in your opinion, in your perspective, what's triggered the transition from proprietary software to open source tools?
Yeah, I think a big catalyst for adopting more open source tools is a lot of the folks coming into the industry tend to use open source tools in college. So they might have graduate programs or undergraduate programs that use open source tools. So they get familiar with that, and they get good experience and good knowledge. And we want to, at these different at GSK, we really want to leverage that experience to do the work that we do delivering drug submissions. But unfortunately, a lot of that takes time to develop internally at the pharma companies. So a lot of initiatives were put forth to develop pilot programs to kind of test things out and build a knowledge base, and then also kind of figure out where problems could arise. And one of the big issues is how to develop packages. And I'm speaking about R here, particularly how to develop packages that can kind of meet the needs of a typical clinical reporting workflow. So that's really where the pharmaverse kind of speaks to kind of filling that gap, where we kind of have slowly been amassing different packages, developing them over time to kind of address the needs of different companies to deliver drug submissions.
And also, continuing the GSK's journey, could you briefly talk us through how, because you initiated the whole change around 2017, but only in 2024 it was a enterprise-wide adoption. So what were the steps to get from the pilot programs all the way to wide adoption in the company?
I think a big bottleneck for us in different pharma companies are around regulatory agencies. So GSK has been engaged with the R Consortium around delivering pilot programs to the FDA in particular, that are all these are R-based submissions. So I think the success of those pilot programs really kind of was a great catalyst to kind of for all the pharma companies to kind of take the risk and do R-based submissions, or to look into doing R-based submissions as seeing it as a way forward. So I really do think that those external initiatives that are engaging regulatory agencies are very important um, for pharma companies to engage with this process of adopting open source tools. One being R. From my vantage point of seeing R being adopted more and more at the company I work for, it's really like as you explore the different problems that kind of come up, and trying to engage with other pharma companies to understand what are some of the solutions people have come forward with. That really speaks to kind of why I think pharmaverse is so powerful. Is that we t- the different pharma companies are all going to kind of encounter the same issues with. Really, the bottleneck is the regulatory agencies, and if we can just all kind of share our knowledge and our experiences, it actually strengthens our ability to adopt open source, um, uh, to do these drug submissions using open source tools.
And you mentioned that some companies were willing to take the risks to go through the pilots and do the submissions through with open source. So, what would be those risks that the companies are taking?
Yeah, so I mean, you have a $1 billion drug submission. You don't want the software to be the bottleneck. You don't want reviewers to look over and question the tools that you're using. So how do you kind of how do you make sure that your tools are validated and qualified? So like regulatory agencies or like the FDA, they don't have to like they have a very great simple statement that they don't take a stance on any software. They just want it to be validated and qualified. So, but as a pharma company, that risk of using open source tools, I think, is heightened when you have to do your own validation and your own qualification of those tools. Um, so seeing other companies talking about how to minimize that risk through groups with the R Consortium and pharmaverse, I think has really kind of helped to mitigate those risks to that potentially $1 billion drug submission.
So, pharmaverse comes as an agent in between FDA and pharma companies to help mitigate those risks.
Yeah. So it allows people to come in and ask questions. I think it's a supportive community about where to get answers, and also just not to have to repeat work over and over again. Um, and I think groups like the R Consortium have done a lot to push that forward. And then there's several groups within PHUSE that also are helping to push this forward. So I think the challenge is trying to make sure folks aren't duplicating work or creating confusion. So I think some groups are spearheading like I see it as like there's three groups. There's PHUSE, there's pharmaverse, and there's R Consortium. All are trying to further the cause of open source usage, and they're all trying to pick different avenues to look into and kind of build tools or at least clarify how to use the tools in the submission process or in clinical reporting.
And are those groups as well collaborate together to figure out which parts of the packages, which big parts of the submissions they will work on to not to duplicate the work the work?
Yeah, so I think a lot of folks in those different initiatives, like they kind of travel between those groups, which is great. It's a great strength because then it kind of helps to make sure people aren't duplicating efforts. Um, but yeah, like Pharmaverse is really more about. I see it as more about the packages, the software that we're using, and I see PHUSE and the R Consortium, and this is again just my opinion of these groups. They could differ a little bit, but like pharmaverse is about the software, whereas like the groups like PHUSE and R Consortium are really helping to strengthen like the how to validate that software or provide guidance on how to use the software, and also test out how to engage regulatory agencies around your software. And then, but again, they all definitely overlap a lot.
Um, Definitely, I want to talk about the initiatives, the open source initiatives that you have been involved in, and if you could talk us briefly through them. But before that, I just want to ask you a question about um, R and other languages, because R has been widely used for the submissions, and I'd like to know a little bit more. Why is this a solution? Why is it like language of choice for so many companies over other languages?
Yeah. So my understanding of the history of R is that it was um, originally built by statisticians who wanted to interface more like as a computer scientist, basically as computer programmers. So they built a language. I think it was at Bell Labs. They built a language called S that then got ported to R later on. So it's always been very focused on statistics, and then but it can be generalized enough that it has a lot of flexibility to it. Whereas like a language like Python was really built as a general purpose language that then has been scoped to machine learning, to web stuff, to even more um, uh, different topics. But for R, it was always scoped towards statistics, and I think that's really where people kind of feel like its power. That it's been really like statisticians who are going through graduate school usually pick up R. Um, so when they come to the industry, they want to continue with that language. A language like Python is much more successful than R. I mean, just in terms of adoption across all different types of industries. But it's not a language that was built by statisticians, whereas R was built. At least its predecessor was built by statisticians.
So the main reason behind it is more because it is widely used within the industry already. Do you see any other differences or benefits in terms of the syntax or any other features, or is it just the main reason is just because it's widely used and it has been used, so it's already out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the statistics part of it. I mean, because that's when you deliver a drug submission, it's really like you're analyzing the data and presenting like your story of why you think you know the the drug is safe and effective for for patients. I think that's a big one, but another one is that some folks at the Posit or our studio have been very influential in adopting something called the grammar of graphics, which they implemented in a package called ggplot, which is kind of a famous graphical package. That those kind of principles and that kind of like success of that package have been adopted by like Python and sort of pushed in their package philosophies or their library philosophies. And then again, a lot of how our studio Posit has been very influential in building a suite of packages called the tidyverse, which I think has made doing data analytics much more accessible to new users. I mean, SQL is a widely popular, like, great language to adopt, but it can be a bit it can be tough for new people to get into, and I think the tidyverse suite of R packages is much more accessible, um, and it has a kind of a common API across all the different packages, and that's actually pharmaverse has been heavily influenced by that kind of philosophy of tidyverse. It's not as regimented as how the API looks across the different packages, but it's definitely like influenced in how we kind of want our packages to feel and look. But again, tidyverse is backed by Posit, our studio.
And tidyverse is a set of packages, right?
Yeah, tidyverse is a set of R packages used to do data analytics, and that suite of packages have been heavily influential, I think, even in Python, in libraries like pandas and polars. like they've really adopted a lot of the philosophy behind the tidyverse packages. From my vantage point, again, I'm not a Python user. These are only like things I've heard.
Let's just dive more into your work and what you have been doing within pharmaverse. I want to start with the Admiral package for creating the Atom datasets in R. So what are atoms, if you could just briefly describe?
Yeah, so atoms kind of form a way to kind of it's a part of a whole kind of framework called it we'll just call it CDISC, which really is about making the data as traceable as possible from the source, from like when the patient gets a drug to an adverse event that happens to some medical history that's collected. So it's all the data is collected in a very traceable way, and atoms in that kind of arc of data transformation is the last stop of that data before it gets rendered into a table or a figure. So it's called analysis ready. Um, so atoms um, typically take in multiple data sets and kind of transform it in a way that your table or your figure program has to do minimal processing on the data to present it at, as summary statistics or as a scatter plot. Um, so atoms are really scoped towards, just to reiterate that point, that like the last step before the rendering of the tables or the figures, ideally. And then the Admiral package is trying to do that for R. So that's not something that 5 years ago there was no package dedicated towards atom transformations in the R ecosystem. There's lots of packages around doing tables and figures, and even interactive tables and figures. But the scope of the Admiral package is really to kind of provide a way to show how you can do atom transformations, create atom data sets in R. And Admiral is the package. It's really um, uh, it tries to make it so most standard atom data sets are available to users of the package, but it's very modular. It's not a like you call like one command and you have a data set. You have to build you have to use different functions within the package to help build the Atom data set. And where I think this modularity is really important is that it you can use other packages in the code and base R or tidyverse packages. So that's I think that's the important part to highlight for Admiral, is that we really see it as a one tool in a toolbox to kind of create your Atom data sets.
And if you could just say what's the impact, like how does it actually help or accelerate, or like what's the time saving in the whole data analysis process?
Yeah, so when atoms are pretty, because they're a very standard process. The whole CDIS framework is very, I would say, trying to create a standard process of bringing data from the sites where the drug is administered all the way to, you submit to the regulatory agency. So Admiral is trying to, like, we typically do the same derivations over and over again across different Atom data sets. We also tend to do similar kind of bringing in data, um, filtering it, sorting it, flagging it for different needs. So all of that is very standard, and you can write functions around that. You can standardize that code. Maybe not every situation is identical, so you make those functions responsive to the needs of the different Atom data sets. So that's where I think Admiral really shines, is that it's it's very modular, so you can use what you want, but it's also very flexible in each function that you can kind of tailor to what you need, depending on the different Atom data set you're trying to create.
And you mentioned you started creating the package 5 years ago. Were you saying like 5 years ago there was nothing like that?
So yeah, 5 years ago, some folks from Roche and GSK got together and saw a need to create a package that was just dedicated towards Atom datasets. And there's also, I think, 2 or 3 packages now dedicated towards STTM datasets, which is like the dataset transformations that happen before atoms. Um, so a lot of times the STTMs will feed, or most, I would say 95% of the time, the STTM datasets feed into the Atom datasets. And then those Atom datasets are then fed into the table and figure programs. My observation is that I think open source was seen like being able to show that you can transform data for STTM and atoms with open source tools, and that they help you arrive at the same conclusions that you would use for proprietary software, I think was a powerful way to kind of signal that open source is a great tool to use. I think previously, before these packages for SCTM and atoms were created, I think the case was a little weaker, and I think, I think with those kind of demonstrations that we can do this programming with open source tools, with these packages like Admiral, and I think the SCTM packages is called Oak. Those have really helped to, I think, burgeon the open source cause for doing submissions using those open source tools.
From what I understand, Admiral played a big role also in getting a buy-in from a lot of pharmaceutical companies to actually proceed with that. There was like another incentive, another advantage that was very prominent, if I can understand it correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I'm heavily involved in Admiral, so I'm probably really biased again. Like, but I think being able to demonstrate that, because you could definitely program an Atom data set without Admiral. Like you don't need, like you can use R, but I think for me, being able to showcase that this can be done, and it can produce high quality results using this package, I think is a huge you know uh, green light for us to engage with open source tools. I think again, it's nice that you can go to the Admiral website and you can see pretty great vignettes, documentation on how to create these Atom datasets in R using our package or using the Admiral package. I don't think anyone else has created those kind of tools yet, but I'm sure more and more will be coming in the coming years. But I think the interest in the um, sort of like different pharma companies getting more and more engaged and seeing less and less risk with these with using open source tools is really because of groups like the pharmaverse, R Consortium, OpenStatsWare, kind of building tools showcasing that the risks are minimal, or building tools to help mitigate the risks.
And then what are the other organizations or people from other organizations that were involved in creation of Admiral?
Yeah, a Taurus has was is big, and continues to be a big influence on Admiral and Pharmaverse packages. Um, let's see, Cytel has been involved. Um, Navitas data sciences are involved. Um, let's see, and then Admiral. So there's standard Atom data sets that we create, and then there's data sets that are very particular to a certain disease area or therapeutic area. So we've actually built extension packages to kind of address those needs that use Admiral as a base, and then are very scoped towards oncology or ophthalmology or metabolic TAs. So groups like Novo Nordisk, Amgen, Johnson and Johnson, I would say Pfizer have gotten involved with these extension packages, which is great because it not only kind of helps us develop core Admiral more, but sometimes the extension packages really showcase like a very scoped use of Admiral that you might not really need for oncology, but you might really need for ophthalmology.
Let's see. And except for extending those, building more of those extensions to the package, is there any other future plans? That's how the Admiral will develop.
Yeah, I think we've been talking a lot about, I mean, the rise of all the LLM AI stuff has been very exciting. So how do we optimize Admiral to be absorbed by these kind of AI chatbots? I think a big push for us in Admiral is to kind of make our documentation more accessible for these LLMs to harvest and kind of create, answers that people might have. I, I'm not sure how that's going to play out, but that's a big topic that we've been discussing is to how to improve our documentation to kind of um, so an AI could come in and because the great thing about our package is it really forces you to standardize how you put information out there, and that's I think really great for an LLM is that if they can, it's like it can take free text, but like if it's standardized, it's much easier for it to absorb and provide answers. So that's I think something we're very very eager to kind of to make use of because I think that's the way as programmers uh, doing Atom data sets. I don't think you're going to be like using these AI tools to kind of deal with to help you write functions to help you write code. I think is just the way of the future, or not even the way of the future. It's like just the present now.
Yeah, there was a massive acceleration the last couple of years, and I think it's affecting all the industries. Any other packages that help within the validation, clinical data analysis that you have contributed to and you're very proud of that you would like to speak about?
Well, not a package that I've contributed to, but so part of the submission process to regulatory agencies is we use a data transport file called an XBT. This we're the only ones across all tech software that use this file format. It's very outdated. It's very old. Um, a big initiative within the R Consortium is to explore other ways to deliver data to regulatory agencies. And one of those package or process, I guess, has been around dataset JSON. JSON is much more native to the internet, to everything. So CDISC, PHUSE, our consortium, the regulatory agencies have been engaged talking about how to make dataset JSON work for everyone. And our package that we're exploring in the R Consortium groups is delivering an R-based submission to the FDA using dataset JSON. So these XBT files that have been around since like the mid 80s, standard use across the industry, still used today, for any drug submission,
That's crazy.
like looking at a way to kind of, yeah, it's the only file type used uh, anywhere. Like this is the only place that it's used. So how do we kind of push out of that boundary that we've kind of, I don't want to say anyone's put in place, but it's just been the regulatory agencies. This is what they want. They want the XBTs, but it's just a transport of information. And dataset JSON, I think, shows a lot of promise to send information to the regulatory agencies. So our consortium is leading that effort to use a package called dataset JSON to deliver an R-based submission. But groups like CDISC have already worked with the FDA to test this out. So we're really just looking at how can an open source tool like R create this dataset JSON, completely replace all XBT files, and deliver a submission to the FDA. And this submission is totally made up. It's like not a real submission. It's just a test thing. We call it a pilot. This is something I'm very eager to see through, and very I think it's going to be a big change in the industry to drop these old file types.
And then I just want to just to follow up this. What are the concerns to moving to another file dataset, like another type? What are the potential risks for the regulatory bodies to do the submissions with JSON?
Yeah, so all their tools are set up to receive this file type and to read in and to analyze it. So I think a risk for using another file type is that they have to retool. So that's a big risk for regulatory agencies. And then a lot of smaller CROs, smaller pharma companies, like they're really set up just to use XBTs. So it's really the adoption of dataset JSON, I think, is kind of contingent on regulatory agencies being able to quickly retool, but also small CROs, small pharma companies being able to also retool as well. And I think that goes back to open source in general. It's like you have the risk is like you need to retool to use these new tools. But like if your process is already established and you use proprietary software, it's like you have to weigh of like, okay, I'm missing out on a lot of these great open source opportunities, but I have my process streamlined. It's really well thought out, and I can deliver something to a regulatory agency very quickly. You don't want to reinvent the wheel just to absorb open source, but I would say it's a big risk because you're losing talent. A lot of very talented people are using open source tools now. Um, you might like lose out some talent that you could have made use of, and then also I think a lot of very exciting AI tools are being developed using open source languages. So again, like being able to absorb those kind of ideas and processes um, into your workflow, maybe in 10 years, if you had just stuck with your proprietary software and your streamlined process, in 10 years, the industry might be completely different and you might have, lost out at the end. So I would say like trying to adopt these solutions is great for everyone.
And I think especially now that the landscape, the technology landscape is like accelerating, changing so quickly. So like right now it's not even about leading or just being in the back of the race, but it's just like the case of survival. We have the question that we ask all of our guests at the end, which might be actually related to the last point. But let's see. What's the problem in your field that you're surprised that has not been solved yet?
Yeah, I mean the XBT thing is very strange to me that we have a file type that was created in the mid '80s. Nobody else uses, only pharma and the regulatory agencies that we interact with. And I'm just shocked that in 2025, that's where we're still at. That is not been abandoned. Um, I think another big issue or something that I've been shocked at is like we talk a lot about containers. Like we can build these images that contain like an operating system, packages, like all this great stuff like Docker and Podman. Like we have these um, ways to really kind of ensure open source tools like don't change or aren't that work like almost out of the box. But regulatory agencies have a hard time receiving containers. Um, and I've kind of shocked that also hasn't been figured out. But groups like the R Consortium are really pushing and interacting very positively with the regulatory agencies to kind of understand why regulatory agencies are nervous or like what tools they kind of need or what kind of knowledge they need to kind of absorb this new technology. And I think as we want to deliver drug submissions, we're being asked in the industry to deliver them faster, higher quality. I think adopting tools like containers, dataset JSON will help us a lot.
Thank you so much. I think this is, yeah, I think that we only like dipped the toe into the topic, but we're running out of time. Thank you, Ben, for all your thoughts, your insights. I'm keeping my fingers crossed for very successful development of new packages so we can all in the industry benefit from what you've been doing.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for asking great questions.
Thank you for listening. This was Where Technology Meets Science by Epsilon. If you know someone who might enjoy the episode, share it with them and subscribe to never miss a new episode. At Epsilon, we empower pharmaceutical and life science companies to leverage open source technology for faster data-driven decision-making in regulated environments. Until the next time.